and her staff for doing a great job. And I want to welcome the Corinthian February Long Island Sound Fleet Dinner Series being held here in Norotan. Given for the Corinthian members and Norotan Yacht Club members. And on Zoom for the Corinthians, Norotan members, and our special guests, the Cruising Club of America. I'd like to thank Rick and Candy for taking the time to share their journeys throughout the world, and in particular all their challenges with COVID. So thank you guys, and I'll turn it over to you, Rick. Thank you over so much.
Thank you much. So it's nice to be back in public again and actually out without a mask on. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. People are still coming in. That's a good sign. So I don't know if I can hide that on the top, but that's all right. So we'll work our way through.
Can
All
you
right.
hear him?
Can you hear? Yes?
Yes, you just gotta clear the window off.
Yeah.
Just click on got it.
Yeah, well, got it. Why would they do that to me? That's not fair. And whoever is running, could we start the recording in the background, please? Because we wanted to try and record this thing.
Yes, you're being recorded.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, and I ask everyone who's attending on Zoom to please mute your mics, and that way we will wait till the end and we'll have question and answer period. That would be great. Okay, thank you very much. All right, so let's dive in. Okay, so a little background. First of all, we'll tell you about the boat. I've had the boat probably for 20 years now, and I've slowly rebuilt almost everything on the boat. It's a Pan Oceanic 43 cutter designed by Ted Brewer, and it's a semi-custom boat. And I got it from about the third or fourth owner, and it's one of those boats where you're not an owner, you are a caretaker. So I've slowly rebuilt everything on the boat, including the electronics and the rigging and all. And it's been a very, very good, solid, boat for doing this kind of trip. Originally, the original owner sailed her home from Taiwan, so she's already been around the world once, and then had all new everything put on the boat. So we're in a pretty good place with it. So here's little pictures of what the boat looks like. It's got a pilot house with inside steering and a nav station. And a double bed up in the pilot house, which is very, very convenient, especially when you're doing offshore work. So, and my crew, Candy, who's over waving to everyone in the crowd here. We grew up and ride together. We went to high school together. We belonged to the same church. We've known each other forever. And, Candy got married and went off this way, and I went that way. And unfortunately, things didn't work the way we thought. And she came to my mother's funeral, and I'm like, where have you been? And she said, oh, well, I live here. It's like, whoa, you're 10 miles away from me. So I took her sailing. And the first time she'd ever gone sailing was on my father's boat in 1972, when I brought all my friends out, and we went out, and a storm came through, and I had to anchor off of a Marina, and with the engine on, and everyone went down below, and they thought I was a hero. So thank you. And for me, it was amazing to find someone crazy enough to do this kind of trip with. So thank you. All right. So we had some crew on board the boat while we were doing some of the trips here. Chrissy and her husband Rick, and we don't make jokes about the Rick, joined us from St. Augustine to Panama. So they came through the San Blas Islands and came all the way to Panama. And then we had Georgina and Paul Scholl, who were good friends of Candy's from Reading, and they came and helped us go through the Panama Canal as our line tenders. And then we went to the Las Perlas Islands on the backside of Panama, and they were great to have. And then after that, we waved goodbye and we sailed off by ourselves. So the overall plan was for a westabout circumnavigation heading from the East Coast through the Panama Canal and onward. And the idea all along was traveling for 9 months or so and home for 3 months, because Candy was a tax accountant and has to be home for tax season. And I tucked myself back into the marine business for a few months. And the marinas are gracious enough to have me back. So it works well for us, and we can marry, life at home with this traveling and not feel like we're, total vagabonds. So we left on a cold and frosty morning in December 2018. And Gary here in the audience slid down the ramp on his butt in the snow and ice to see us off, and took some pictures and waved goodbye. And that was very, very kind. But it was, we had been away visiting Candy's mother in Australia, and we saw that I was watching from afar that we had 2 highs coming through, and we had a window, and we had to take the window, because otherwise we'd be stuck here for the winter. So we shoved off, and we went screaming through Manhattan, with the current, and we had propane tanks lashed in the cockpit, with a hose running down the companionway stairs to a propane camp stove. And that kept us 70 degrees in the pilot house as the single staysail and the wind vane steering sailed us down the Jersey coast. So Christmas Eve, we went through the city, very, very special. When we do watch keeping with the pilot house, it's really easy, because we take turns sleeping in the pilot berth right across from the nav station. And we're always about 3 feet or 4 feet away from each other. So if Candy's in a panic because something shows up on the radar or AIS, she can just come over and whack me, and and I'm up. I tried to discourage that as much as possible. We have a leak cloth up, and that keeps you from flying out of the bed. So we had Christmas underway, and we had a pre-cooked squab dinner that Candy put together, and we celebrated Christmas down along the Jersey shore. So we went 430 miles down to North Carolina, and we were slowly shedding our winter clothes. We started to wear shorts, and we were greeted by our first pods of dolphin. And we had been sailing just with a staysail up, a little tiny staysail in the wind vane. And finally we got the main up, and we usually put the first or second reef in. And we did quite well sailing down the coast. So part of our trip is, we worked our way down the coast, ended up in North Carolina, then St. Augustine, and then worked our way down through the rest. And we're going to cover that as we go. So we stayed in St. Augustine with my sister and her husband. And I had boxes of things that needed to be installed that we couldn't install up here because it was winter and cold. So as we're sailing down, we got there, and we tore the boat apart and stayed with them. And it was good because my daughter and her husband came in, and they were great help trying to get us, done and ready and on our way, because we had a lot of installations to do. So we installed a new water maker, new wind generator, new B&G chart plotter on the helm and the cockpit, stainless steel grates for the companionway so we could lock ourselves in or people out, a new wind generator, galley sink faucets. We took all the winches apart and relubed them, varnished, and so much more. And that sounds like a lot, but you have to realize that for 2 years prior, we were doing works, including replacing all the rigging, replacing all the standing and running rigging, many new electronics down below, single sidebands, all that stuff in the years leading up to it. But they were great help, and it was really fun to do that. So finally, it was time to leave St. Augustine. So we went through the Bridge of Lions down there, and my sister actually was up on the bridge and filmed us going through the bridge to wave goodbye. And it was a wonderful, way of saying goodbye to everyone. And then we were on our way. So it was nice to have some enthusiastic muscle on board, because the mainsail on the boat is pretty big, fully battened, 19-foot boom. When you start hoisting that main, it's both Candy and I both heaving with all of our weight to get the thing 3/4 the way up, and then you're grinding the rest of the way. So it was nice to have the help. I can tell you we have since cheated, and we bought one of those electric winch things that you hold, and it's got a variable speed, and I can pull the main up by myself. So be careful. But we're having, it's really worked well. And Rick was fishing along the way, and he caught one, I think, a tiny little fish and a barracuda. So we didn't do well, and no mahi, for us. So we ended up in the Grand Turks Islands, and that was a beautiful place. We toured around, went out to dinner, had a good time, and it was just gorgeous. And then we ended up at Big Sandy Key, which was an island off of Turks and Caicos, and we had the whole island to ourselves. It was this beautiful, pristine island, lovely beaches and everything, lots of rock formations, and you can see the boat anchored in this beautiful turquoise water, and we finally felt like we were getting someplace fun. So we were the only people there. So sailing from there to Panama, we had lots of time to sleep or read off watch. We had after dinner movies every night. It was a 7-day passage, about 1,000 miles through the Windward Passage. And we went between Cuba and Haiti to come through. As we approached Colón, Panama, there were dozens of ships at anchor right outside the Panama Canal waiting for their turn to go through. So we came in through the big jetties that lead in towards the Panama Canal and turn hard right, and you go to Shelter Bay Marina. Shelter Bay Marina is the favorite staging point for provisioning and arranging the passage through the canal. They had a great restaurant. They had a really nice pool. I'm starting my timer, which I didn't start. It was a port of entry and access to the Colón in Panama City, and they have a new bridge that leads to Colón. And as we were there, the marina was discovered by people coming to eat and get away from the cities. There was bus transport. They ran a van into Colón so we could go provisioning and shopping. And they have a Wednesday night cruisers barbecue. It was a great get together. So we made a lot of friends, and we have followed some of these friends all the way down to Ecuador and then back up to Panama. So it was really quite nice. So a little further down around the corner from, and this is still in the Caribbean side, we went around the corner to Portobello. Portobello is where the Spanish gold, or the Mexican gold, was delivered to the Spanish treasure ships to take to Spain. So there were 3 forts around the outside of the harbor, one on either side and one down the bottom. And this picture is the fort down in the bottom. It's not really a museum. There's no one there. I mean, there are very few signs even set up, but they've set the whole thing up, and it's really gorgeous. You can just go wander around and have fun with it. So once we got around the corner from Portobello, we finally made it to the San Blas Islands. And that's also called Cunayala. Cunayala is the Indian name for San Blas. It's 378 islands off the Caribbean side of Panama, ruled by themselves, but under the protection of Panama. And in Cunayala, some islands with very few or no inhabitants on them at all, and some with the greatest population density in the world. They really jam it in. So we met some wonderful people, and we bought some very colorful molas. And the lady on the right-hand side was in the cruising guide. And we saw this lady in the cruising guide and said, oh my God, we have to get there. And we walked down this island, and she comes popping out of her little thatched hut and with her molas, and we're like, we're there. We made it.
The woman in the middle is actually a man.
Yes. So
he's very famous. He's also in the cruising books, and he makes the most beautiful moles, known for his spectacular. So when he came to our boat and knocked on the boat, I said, Lisa!
So we recognized Lisa right away.
Please do, bring your molas. And there you see, I bought his moles. His
So
moles. And they are now up in my room.
they have the Kuna tradition is what, the fifth
girl, if they don't have a
yeah, if they don't have a girl, if they don't have a girl, the 5th boy is raised as a girl. So she didn't really have a chance. He became the mola maker, and all of the molas are signed Lisa. So you have a real one when you're there, and very famous, very well known. So this is a typical Cunayala island on Lemon Key. And they're beautiful islands. When the palm fronds fall, they immediately gather them up, drag them off to the side of the island, and sometime in the middle of the night or whenever, they burn them. So the islands are spotless. And you can see I was really relaxing, taking it easy, because the navigation part was just so hard. So you can see what it was like and how beautiful it was. We were lucky enough to be invited to Congreso, which is the local meeting house where they run their businesses and run their government. And it's very rare for, you know, gringos to get invited to this. And it was really an eye-opening experience. So that was actually a privilege. Here's a dugout canoe, an ulu, that was dug from a single log by hand tools. You know, going to the Cunayala is like stepping back 300 and 400 years in history. And even though some of the kids now have cell phones and we're starting to see solar panels and satellite dishes, they still are living this very, very, you know, simple lifestyle. And we felt very, very lucky to get there before it all gets modern and changes. And the guy on the right was heading out to the Wednesday night Twilight Series racing. So we met some wonderful people. We had a bunch of people out to our boat. We met some of the local mola makers. We met some fishermen. Candy actually got a chance to go out paddling around in an ulu when the guy came out and said, come on, let's go. So it was really wonderful, you know, because we find we like to immerse ourselves in the local culture. And the closer we can get to the people, the more we understand and the more they share with us.
The woman on the far right, on the right picture, she's covering her face because the Cunayala do not believe that they can photograph by their spirits.
Right.
So she
So-
accepted our request for a picture, but she covered her face.
That's true. So Candy had brought a bunch of National Geographic magazines, coloring books, markers, crayons, pencils, pens, and things to share as we went along. So we hooked up with a local school teacher and he said, come on. And we brought stuff in and they were just very, very happy to share it with,
So he
to
traveled
share
from
it.
island to island to teach English to the Cunayala, and he was using those magazines, he was taking copies of them and sharing them as his science lessons. So he really appreciated it.
Was good. So this is a typical village street in Cunayala. I mean, it's all dirt. You know, there'll be puddles whenever it rains. There are thatched roofs and things, but you will see on the right-hand side of the picture a post with a solar panel on it. And they're making electricity coming down to the battery, sometimes running TV sets. But so we see what we saw was the older people would dress in the traditional, which meant the married women would have a ring in their nose and their hair cropped short and wear leggings and the traditional garb. Their daughters would wear a mole on the top, but shorts and something else on the bottom. And the kids were dressed completely Western, shorts and t-shirts and everything else. So we're lucky, feel very, very lucky to get there at a time before it's making the change to complete modern living. So the next stop was the Panama Canal. So we went through the Panama Canal and we had a monster 800-foot ship behind us in the second chamber of the Miraflores lock. And we have an advisor on board. We were rafted up together with another boat. So they always have you go through with two, or sometimes a big boat and two on either side. So we went through and we had our dock lines going up to this side. They had their dock lines going up to that side. And we had plenty of fenders on both sides of the boat. So in case you broke free, you wouldn't bash up against the side of the locks. So the advisor said, be ready to slip those lines. And we're like, well, why is that? And he said, in case that guy doesn't stop. So it's like, okay, thank you. So here my sister happened to be on the Panama Canal webcam and was able to snap a picture of us and two little boats in front of the freighter. That's us. So you see how tiny and insignificant you are in the whole scheme of things. And I had no clue how big that boat was behind us, and I'm probably glad I didn't. So in Panama City, it's a very, very modern city, incredible buildings and twisted, strange buildings and spires and peaks and things, very, very modern. And they have a bunch of rooftop bars where you can go up to the rooftop bars and go off and see. And this was us with Georgina and Paul having dinner and before we head off to the islands to visit.
I would like to quickly interject. The kids decided that they wanted to go home before the canal. So they had left, and you're required to have 5 people on the boat to do the canal. You have to have two and two, and then the captain. So we were short crew, and either you pay someone you didn't know, or you get someone you do know. And I had friends from Reading, the Shoals, and I talked literally in 1 week. I said, "We get down here, we're on the way." They booked the flight, they came down, and they helped us to be translated, and they flew home the week later. Really well.
So it was pretty amazing. We were very thankful.
No, that's the Suez. Okay.
Right. So we went through the canal, and then we ended up over on the Pearl Islands, the Los Perlas. And there were plenty of whales everywhere you went. They were just popping up and going. When you swam through the water or was cleaning the bottom of the boat, I would hear the whales singing in the background, which was really quite amazing. This beach, you've got to be very careful where you go and anchor or where you bring the dinghy in, because the tides are 15 feet. And if you make a mistake, then the boat is way up the beach. And more than once, we managed to find the boat way up the beach. And in this case, on the right-hand side, we had to go get logs from the forest and drag them down and make ways so that we could roll the dinghy down the beach. And I can tell you this year, I just ordered some big rollers that go on the back of the boat with big pneumatic wheels. So the whales were going by. At one point, we were anchoring inside a little anchorage between an island and the mainland. And as we came in slowly, because the chart said it was 15 feet, 10 feet deep, and we were reading 60 feet on the depth sounder. So Candy's up on the bow, we're going through, and this beautiful 40-foot whale just comes out next to us, swimming by, kind of gave us the eyeball, and then kept going. So it was an amazing situation. So, and then we met some French cruisers traveling with 2 young kids who were on a shoestring budget. And I've since tried to check up with them on AIS and find out where they are. And they ditched out for the South Pacific and made it before COVID. So they're already out there, and I'm jealous. So then we went, yes.
Transit time through the canal.
Transit time, 2 days. Well, yeah, we did the first couple of locks, and then we stay in the lake, Lake Bactoon. There's a big, like 10 or 12-foot mooring buoy. So they wanted us to tie on either side of the mooring buoy, and we said, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to stay rafted up, and we're going to put mooring lines to the buoy and swing behind it. And it was funny because the advisor said, no one's ever asked you that before. But I wasn't going to tie up to this huge steel thing with all the tugboats going by and bash up against it. So we did that, and then the next advisor showed up at the crack of dawn the next morning, and then we had to race across Gatun Lake and then to the next sets of locks. So we started at probably at 6 o'clock in the evening, and then finished at like 11, and in some points in the pouring rain. And then the next day was really nice, and we took off at, I don't know, 7, 9 o'clock in the morning, and then roared through, and by mid-afternoon we were on the other side. And when that last locks opened and the Pacific was there, I've got to tell you, my heart was beating, because there was no turning around now. This is it. We're there. So on the backside of Panama, when you head down towards Colombia and the South American side, there's the Gulf of San Miguel and the Darien Gap. And the Darien Gap goes way up inside on these rivers. So we decided to go up and try these rivers and see how far we could go. And in some cases, we went up maybe too far and had to, quickly beat a hasty retreat, because where was a 20-foot hole to go anchor in turned out to be completely socked in with sand. But we then went up the Cucanati River, the middle river, and it was very tidal. And what happened is you had to get in the dinghy, and when the tide started coming in, you went with it and went all the way up this river. And then you would end up at their little town, but then the tide would go out rapidly, and you were stuck there for the tide until the tide came back up. And the minute the tide came back up the river, you had to hop in your dinghy and roar back out to try and make it. So this place was really interesting, because they grow beef, and have cows and cattle, and they are basically the Wild West. So here's a horse in front of the Cowboy Bar with the guy dressed in blue jeans and a Stetson hat, just coming in. And you can see that the technology now, we have solar panels, satellite dishes, and payphones, in this place. But the the Pan American Highway, like it's way up and away. It barely makes its way through. And all of their cattle are grazing on very, very steep hillsides with little walkways all the way through. So he said, how many cows do you really have? You know, and the guy was like, no, they're all out there, you know. So we met the owner of, well, the son of the owner of one of the largest ranches there, who also owned one of the largest shopping marts, the supermarket. And we're trying to find a cell phone signal, and he said, no, you have to stand right here. Candy looked at him like, yeah, come on. And he goes, no, 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 just stand right here next to the filler. And he looks and goes, wow, that's great. So he became our fast friend and invited us for lunch and called his wife and said, hey, could you please prepare lunch? So we went back, and Candy had brought a bunch of coloring books and magazines and bubbles, you know, where you dip the bubbles and blow them. And their kids were completely ecstatic to get these nice presents. So, you know, it's funny, you just got to go with your gut and trust the people. And he gave us a tour up to the top of the mountains. And way at the top of the mountains, in the middle of their farmlands, we could look down and see the boat this big in the harbor. Amazing. So here's just an idea of what navigation is like. So you see the yellow line is us coming in on one of the charts, right? So one chart, Navionics, said, okay, you're in the middle of the land. And the Open CPN and the guidebook that we have on that showed us in the middle of the island. And the truth was, we were in the middle in like 60 feet of water. So, you know, we get used to having one on the bow, one on the stern, and we've got hand signals. You know, it's like reverse, reverse, reverse. So that's just part of navigating around there. So then we went to Ecuador, and the goal was always to get to Ecuador and then leave the boat for 3 months, come back, head to the Galapagos Islands, and then head to the South Pacific. So we sailed the boat to Ecuador, and we were going to take land trips. So that was the whole key. So we came in at Bahia de Caracas. Now you'll see on here the waves breaking off the shoreline. You know, the guidebooks do not do it justice. These waves were really quite big. It was quite shoal, and we had to come in almost to the beach and then turn hard left and come along the beach and tuck around the corner. They had a pilot boat, a panga, basically waiting for us, and we had to follow him in. So that was really fun coming in. And at one point, Candy was face down on the deck, holding on with her fingernails, and I'm goosing the boat, and the engine's floored, trying to not broach in the waves. So that wasn't quite what we signed up for, but there are only a handful of harbors in Ecuador where you can actually pull the boat in. And the furthest one down was a couple 100 miles and charged like outrageous pricing because they could. So this place was reasonable, so we went there. So once we were in, we you know, there's a restaurant / marina / mooring field, and that's where we stayed. There was almost no tourist traffic, and you know, many of the tall buildings were abandoned shells because they had a bunch of earthquakes, and the earthquakes, so no one would come back and reinvest. So Port Amistad Yacht Club and Marina was a little waterfront restaurant with a dinghy dock and moorings. Gene was an expat US guy who worked in the military in South America, really fell in love with Ecuador, fell in love with this girl. And you know, he gave, bought the marina, he gave pirate boat rides. So he'd dress as a pirate and take people out for little cruises. And you know, he had a little business going, it was quite nice. But Bahia de Caracas was quite poor. So you have dirt streets in many places. You've got these kind of motorcycles and trucks and things with wood beds and things on them. You know, the stairway there goes up to the top of the mountain where there's a huge cross over the top that shines down on the harbor. COVID hit Ecuador, and it hit really hard because there were very few. The hospital in town was a triage medical center, not a hospital. No ventilators whatsoever. The only ventilators were miles and miles, you know, like hours away in the larger cities. So, you know, unfortunately, once things were bad and people were dying, the hopeless families were putting their bodies of their loved ones out on the street and try, because they couldn't collect. And we decided, okay, that's probably not a good place to be right now. So we came home. So what we did is once we came home, ultimately we left the boat there. But while we were there, prior to COVID hitting, we decided to go on a land tour inland. So we left Bahia de Caracas. We hopped on what they call a hop bus. A hop bus is very much like a Eurail pass, but you get on a bus and you have 1 year and you can go anywhere in Ecuador. And as long as you call them the day before, you can get back on the bus. So we toured all the way through Ecuador. This is all just prior to COVID hitting. So we went to the Cotopaxi volcano at 16,000 feet. We were visiting indigenous families in the Amazon River area. We went to the Kyoto volcano, Baños, Cuenca. We went to thermal pools that overlooked the city, hundreds of feet below. A gorgeous, gorgeous thing. And then once we were done Ecuador, we went down to Peru and we did the same thing and hopped on the Peru hop bus. So we traveled inland Peru, where it was very dry and arid area, where they had huge sand dunes and they had dune buggy rides through the sand dunes. But we traveled inland and it was beautiful area. And at one point, where you see where the cathedral is and all the people in the thing, there was a huge soccer match against another city nearby, and the stadium was full. So they set up huge screens and they had the extra people watching the soccer match in the middle of the large square. We did a homestay in Lake Titicaca. And so we had dressed in indigenous outfits and had a dance with them, which was really interesting. And it was just a beautiful trip and we got to see things. And on on my bucket list was to see the Nazca lines in Peru. So we were able to hop on a small airplane and go fly over the Nazca lines, where there are multi-thousand-foot designs drawn in the desert. In many cases, people have said, "Oh, that's done by aliens and things," but it was very interesting and quite fun to watch. But you can see on the hillside here, there's a guy who looks like he's in a spacesuit waving hello. So I'll leave that to you. So Candy's bucket list included Machu Picchu. Now, my idea of Machu Picchu is you take the bus up, you get out, you go walk around the site, get back on the bus, go back down and have dinner. Candy's idea is a 4-day, 3-night hike with porters carrying all of our stuff up and camping in a tent every night. So it was the single hardest thing I ever did in my life. You take 100 steps up these rocky little pathway and you pant and you've got cocoa leaves in your cheek. So you chomp on some cocoa leaves and get this cocoa rush. And then you go charging up the next 100 feet and you pant and chew on the leaves. And I went through a lot of leaves. So it was fun. But I've got to tell you that the results were unbelievable. The vision, what you see when you get to the very top and look down is completely surpassing all the hype. So, and you can see how the trail, this is coming down the trail in the rain on these slippery rocks, trying to work your way down. You had to be really careful. And luckily we had adjustable hiking sticks. So you set them really long. So when you're coming down, to keep you from plunging forward over into the rocks. So that was fun. So then we flew home and our plan was to come back in 3 months and sail to the Galapagos. So we had taxis and we had everything else. And then COVID hit. And at that point we were like, okay, this is going to be tough. So when Candy still had taxes and ultimately I had to come back to Puerto Amistad. But like every other cruiser whose plans were dashed with the spread of COVID, we were stuck at home in the boats in Ecuador. So while the boat was prepared for 3 months away in a semi-supervised environment, it wasn't mothballed for a year. So we were on a mooring in the middle of Puerto Amistad Yacht Club. They had good security. They had a guard and a workboat who would check on the boat every half hour or so. They moved the boat closer and put it on a 4.5 mooring, so we were safe on this tidal river. We canceled our return trips. We made arrangements for Gene, the manager, to watch our boat, and a diver to, quote unquote, do the bottom every month. And we'll talk about that later. And it ended up being a year stuck on the mooring. So So here's the harbor when I got back. All the boats that were on the moorings there had left. There's Independence.
We were at.
There's my friend Craig on his boat, who left soon after I did to also head back to Panama. And here is a completely empty bar and restaurant with no patrons, no money coming in. Other than COVID, I could have stayed there. It was perfect. So that gives you an idea of where we were and what we were doing. So ultimately, it got scary for us. Ecuador allows a vessel a 1-year grace period to stay in country before they consider the boat imported and liable for importation duty. Gene, the Marina owner, had been in touch with me all along and telling me that he was assuring me that Ecuador was going to extend the 1 year by 6 months. So on month 4, he sent me a very distressing message. The extension had been shortened to 3 months, and we were already a month over. So Candy was immersed in tax season, and I made plans to return to Ecuador, figure out what to do. And the goal originally was to take the boat from Ecuador, go down the coast about 60 miles to Colombia, check into a pretty sketchy little town, check back out, come back to Ecuador, and get another year. A friend we had in Ecuador had kind enough to go check on the boat. And he reported that the pelicans had found a new perch on the bow, and the humid environment inside the boat had fostered the growth of mold, and that we should really plan on some serious work before we were ready to go anywhere with the boat. So that gives you just a little idea of what I was up against. And the first couple of nights I slept in the cockpit with a cartridge mask on my face because the mold was so bad down below, I couldn't stay down below in the boat. So on arrival, I was told that there was to be a fine for overstaying this 1 month. It started at $6,000 and it quickly swelled to $8,000. Gene ran interference for me, went back to the government, did a formal protest. It would take 2 or 3 weeks to decide what was going to come out. But I realized that the odds were kind of stacking against me and there was really not much hope here. So I went to the port captain, knowing that the port captain and the immigration people are separate parts of the government. And there was a very good chance that I could get a Zarpa to get me out of the country with the boat. And I would just ignore customs and immigration. So that's what we did. I got my Zarpa. Everything was fine. And within a week, I had cleaned the boat, checked all the systems, made the necessary repairs, provisioned, found a pickup crewman, and bolted for Panama. And the first 2 nights, I can tell you, every couple of hours, I was looking over my shoulder, looking for some flashing light. So I also discovered that the diver's idea of doing the bottom of the boat was quite different than mine. That in the right-hand picture, you can see the hose off the through hull for the head. I went to a boat, pumped the head, and it was like nothing happening. I'm like, okay, that's great. So the first thing you do is, do I have water? Well, I took the hose off, and then I opened the through hull, and nothing came in. Their idea of cleaning the bottom doesn't include sticking a screwdriver up into the through hull and cleaning all the barnacles out. So it was so thick and nasty that I had the through hull wide open and nothing came in. So you can imagine when I finally put my hand over it with the screwdriver going through and banged on it, and it finally opened it all up. So that was fun. So then we had the divers come back and do the bottom again. We talked about it. And he was bottom cleaning with a 12-volt hookah at slack tide. And we had burlap bags wrapped over the prop. And he had to remove all the burlap bags that kept the barnacles from growing on it. We had to do some work on the bow with the anchor chain. It cuts away some chain that looked a little fishy and redo it. You know, and this guy I hired was really wonderful. But there was a little bit of a problem we'll get into. So here I am filling my propane tank from an Ecuadorian fuel tank. What you do is you have fittings for theirs running down to an adapter that goes to ours. And you hang one upside down and you put it together with hose clamps and you let it gravity feed for about 3 days. And eventually you're able to fill up your tank about 3/4 of the way. If you can cool the bottom tank and heat up the top tank, it runs a little faster, but that's kind of, you know, lucky if we could do that. So this is my crew in the middle. And so I hired this local guy. He was a fisherman and he was well recommended. He had been a bodyguard or something like that. So after a day and a half of familiarizing with our Spanish only speaking crewmen on the boat, safety procedures, watchkeeping duties, food prep, heavy weather tactics, how to reef. And I was using Google Translate and we had Wi-Fi. So I could talk in and it would come out Spanish and he'd talk back and it was great. We decided it was time to go. When we left, I lost the Wi-Fi. So I had to type everything in English and translate it to Spanish. And when I held it up to him so he could see the screen, I saw a quizzical look on his face. He really didn't read Spanish very well. So here I am stuck with a guy for 5 or 6 days on the boat who doesn't really speak, you know, anything, and shy of rubbing my tummy and saying I'm hungry and, you know, pointing where the rice and beans and things are that we bought. So that was fun. We did sign language ultimately. And what the worst part was, whenever it got rough and I had to reef the main and try to do things, I'd say, okay, you stay here, you stay here. And I'm going to go up and I have the harness on. I'm strapped to the boat. I've got my jack lines on. Everything's good. And I go up and I start to reef the main. And I turn around, he's standing on the deck, you know, in his t-shirt and his shorts. I'm like, no, go back. So you can imagine it was kind of interesting. And I just had to be good sport about it all. But it was the wrong time of year for the trip. And we broke the cardinal rule of cruising. Don't let the schedule dictate your voyage. Plan your voyage on the favorable weather window. We just had to get out of Dodge. So that's what we did. So what usually is a downwind with the current 4-day sail turned into a 7-day upwind slog into the current and a 15-foot tidal flow off the cove there, with 30-35 knots of breeze, 2 reefs in the main, a little tiny staysail up, and it wasn't weather. And this guy was a really good sport with all this because he had never sailed before, and he never will again. But we sailed upwind, and it wasn't whether, you know, we could handle it, or the boat could handle it. The question was whether you could handle it. But what it did is it gave me a chance to sleep, and that's all I really needed. Is I needed, you know, a chance to sleep, and that way I could do the weather, I could do the navigation, I could figure out where the currents were and try to avoid things. So here we are crossing the equator, 000, okay, going the wrong way. And we went through the doldrums, we motored for about 3 days, and then we were bashed by winds on the nose and super high gusts, matching waves. So much fun. And it was so nasty out that all the local birds happened to see us go by. They would come and land on the deck to try and, you know, take a rest because it was so miserable out there. So we approached the Panama Canal shipping lanes, and there were dozens of 600 to 900 foot ships coming in from every direction. The rapidly increasing currents and temperature greeted us, and we clawed our way up into the Gulf of Panama. Finally, we ended up at Vistamar Marina, about 45 miles west of Panama City on the Pacific side. It took an hour-and-a-half cab ride, about $130 to get to immigrations in Panama City. And I got that important stamp on my visa, and we got the boat checked in. But the cruising visa couldn't be issued until the next day. So the next day I had to take another $130 cab ride back to the city and get stamped in. But we were legal and we were there. So now, because we had absconded from the Ecuador, we may have to forego the Galapagos, because Galapagos is an Ecuadorian island, and we may be on the bad list depending on how good their computer systems are. So the marina is just juts out from the coastline. There's really nothing much there. They had developed a whole series of kind of high-end residences along the water, this terraced development, and the marina was part of that. And you can see in the middle, there's a boatyard where they can haul the boats, and then where all the boats are inside. So it was really quite a nice place. They had Wednesday night potluck dinners for the crew. They had Tuesday night trivia over the VHF. There were some people who had been stuck there for the whole COVID year. There was one lady who was on a boat who never came out of her boat. And we all referred to her as the ghost lady. And they had food delivered to the boat. Her husband would come out occasionally, but I never saw her for months at a time because people were just paranoid. But Panama handled COVID really well. Panama had men's days at the stores, women's days alternating. On the weekends, all the stores were closed and everyone had to have a mask. And as soon as the inoculations came in, they all started to get inoculated. And the reason wasn't because that they were just being over careful. There were no hospitals. If you got it, there's a really good chance that's the end of you. So the best way to do that is to not go out. So we became comfortable with the crews and people around. Everyone had gotten, had gotten some inoculations. This is the Boga Bar, local restaurant there. They had good food, cheap beer, and blazingly fast internet. So the crews would always find themselves up there trying to catch up. It was brutally hot in the sun. The winds were blowing really hard all day. The marina is subject to the ocean swell. So the swell would come in, hit the beach, and bounce back to the marina. So the first night or first couple of nights I was there, the boat felt like it was underway. And I woke up in the middle of the night, like, oh, I'm on watch. And the boat was at the dock, just jerking. And it got to the point where I actually had to change some of the dock lines on the boat, because if you put a glass down and you had a nylon braided dock line, the boat would jerk up so hard that it would knock your glass over. So I had to put 3-stranded nylon stretchy lines on the boat to try and absorb the loads. And the cleats were so sharp, I had to wrap them with rags. And then by putting them on rags, then we had, I'd protect the lines from chafing through, because they were known to chafe the thing. So days were spent cleaning, repairing, pulling out the sewing machine. I made sunshines, the bini top, and remember, the definition of cruising is boat repair in exotic places. So since we weren't coming back to the end of cyclone season, I arranged for the yard to haul out the boat. So here's where the ramp is. They use a big hydraulic trailer and they back it down a ramp, but it's inside the surf line. So you had to wait for high tide, no wind, no surf, and then they would back the trailer down and you bring the boat in. So they did just that. And we were able to haul the boat out of the water and put her away, and saying, okay, in 9 months, we're going to come back and we're going to go to French Polynesia. So that was the goal. So I headed home and I got back to work, and we made the plans for the South Pacific. While at the Annapolis Boat Show, while we were home, we joined the Panama Posse. It's a group of 300 boats. And you plan your own schedule between Southern California and Annapolis via the Panama Canal. And they have discounts with hundreds of marinas. They've got all the anchorages all the way between, all noted and designated. Really wonderful group where it was a lifetime of knowledge all coming together, and everyone contributed to it. So it was really quite the group to belong to. And we've made a lot of friends through that. And they also have a Monday morning phone call where everyone logs in, and they run it like a radio net in a cruising zone, where they check in and everyone checks in and says hello, and they run through the weather, they run through what's happening, they run through the latest updates of what countries are opening. So it's been great. So, French Polynesia didn't open, so we had to come up with and then switch to plan B. So our plan B was, I'm not ready to bring the boat home. If I go through the canal the wrong way, I'm going to be really unhappy, because I've been dreaming of this since I was 15. So what we did is we decided to start down in Panama and bring the boat all the way up to Mexico. And the goal was to go further up in Mexico, but once we realized how far and how long it would take and how nasty the conditions were, we decided, okay, we're not going to go that far. So just before we're ready to fly down to Mexico, a fellow cruiser sent me the most disturbing news ever that kept me awake for nights and for weeks. The hydraulic trailer at the marina had a serious accident and had plunged the boat over the side of the ramp at the marina. Okay, damaging the trailer, damaging the boat. And the question now was, once we got there, could we launch the boat? So we lost a lot of sleep. And in those few weeks, the yard hired a crane, salvaged and rebuilt the trailer, hauled the damaged boat, hauled 3 additional boats. And then when I checked in with the manager, he says, no problem, you're good to go.
That couple is still in that marina trying to get the boat.
They're trying to get the boat fixed. So they had a wing keel, it damaged the wing keel, it bent the rudder shaft, it punctured the back of the boat. They filled up with water, a lot of water damage
No
inside.
insurance.
Yeah, and they had no insurance. And the yard's insurance was like really fighting with them because they didn't feel,
Lesson learned.
you know, yeah. So you've got to, you've got to be prepared for this stuff. So we ended up in Panama and it was time to start working on the boat. Now I hadn't done the bottom for 4 years because we used Petit Trinidad with 65% copper. So that was great all the way through, but we were kind of running down on the paint. So in 90-degree heat, I sanded the bottom, put on 4 coats of another good copper paint, put a new circuit board in the refrigerator, changed the oil, repacked the stuffing box, updated the B&G firmware, worked on dozens of other projects, and we also revarnished all the teak on the boat, including the rail all the way around. Meanwhile, Candy was cleaning the interior, washing every piece of clothing, every locker, every nook and cranny, and tried to remove 2 years worth of grime and mold. So it was kind of fun.
2 weeks became 5.
Yeah. So while we were on the hard, we stayed with a local marine contractor who had a little spot where he had a bunch of little apartments on his property. And so we rented one of those little apartments to stay in. It was rustic, but their friendship was really good and we enjoyed the stay. But this is what we were dealing with. This is a typical Central American hot water shower with a 220 volts into the water heater that's built into the shower head. But the little apartment had air conditioning. Okay, so we were pretty happy. And meanwhile, on the little stove there, Candy cooked a dozen or more dinners so that we could bring them back to the boat and freeze them so that when we were on our way, we'd have pre-cooked meals. So while we were there, we stopped and immersed ourselves in the local culture. We were invited to the San Carlos Parade, celebrating the Independence Day and the 200th year anniversary of freedom from the Spanish. So here's the queen of the parade. And there were a lot of performances of traditional Mexican folk and music. So music was playing all day and there were hundreds of people out participating. So every day we rode our folding bikes from Ollie's captain's cabin to the marina, which is about 2 miles away. So we had to trek along the beach past the fishing village with the pangas all hauled up on the beach and through a small path that was in the forested area that kind of felt like Jurassic Park. So for about a week of riding, we finally learned that there was a crocodile who lived in that area and would come up out of the water. And finally, we saw him as a stream when we biked over a small bridge. And in the dark, his eyes would glow ominously in my headlight when I'm riding my bicycle. So Candy and others would enjoy the aqua exercise in the pool, on stationary bicycles, pedaling. She said it was hard, but I can't believe that. Our hostess Denise and Candy organized a traditional Thanksgiving dinner and the crew potluck on Thanksgiving Day. And we managed to find 2 20-pound turkeys and all the side dishes were prepared by boats from the marina. And we fed 40 people. And there were many Europeans, South Africans, and Canadians who had never experienced a traditional American Thanksgiving and they loved it. So that was quite fun. And then soon enough, it was launch day. So with a nervous knot in our stomachs, we watched the trailer now with a secure lock on the hitch and runaway chains attached, just in case. And they brought the boat down the ramp and launched her in the water. And all was going really well until one of the arms on the trailer stopped working. So no big deal. The guy opened up the box and wiggled the wires inside, to get the arm to come down. And, you can imagine my heart pounding. You just, and you look at this and you can't make this up. Just can't make it. So our goal was to, head up the coastline. And this is actually the track of it. So we had project safety and rigging inspections. It was time to say goodbye to everyone. So we shoved off for Mexico. But this trip seemed more like a delivery than a cruise. And we decided not to press on all the way to the Sea of Cortez because our goal was to try and get back to Florida and spend Christmas with my daughter, New Year's with my sister, and then come back to Connecticut where my daughter was going to fly back up for a baby shower because she's pregnant. So we had a lot of going against us. So as we traveled the Panamanian coast, We caught up with a Canadian family we knew from Vistamar, and they were slowly making their way to Mexico and left well before us. So we caught up with them, and you know, we were able to watch them on AIS and leapfrog each other. And it was quite fun. But we had checked out in Panama City, and they waited to the last town in Panama to check out. And that probably wasn't the smartest thing to do, because they didn't want to go through launching their dinghy, which was strapped to the foredeck like ours. But the only way to get to shore then was to like use a kayak. But it was an open shore with waves breaking on the beach. So they put all their stuff in plastic bags and paddled ashore, got drenched, and had to go through customs and immigration and get stamped out of Panama. So there were no docks, a dilapidated jetty, and the coastline was exposed to ocean swells. And you can imagine that night was not a really fun night at anchor. So along the Central American coast, they're fraught with winds and currents that happen. So this is a shot from windy.com, and where the Caribbean wind is channeled through the mountains into the southern coastline. And what's blowing 20 in the Caribbean side comes out blowing 30 to 50 in the outside. So underway, I might watch at night because Candy struggles to sleep during the day. And then I spend most of the morning sleeping and then spend the afternoon working on stuff that seems to keep breaking on the boat, and just to keep things going. Leaving your boat for months and years in a hot tropic area takes its toll on pumps and hoses and electrical systems. So Candy usually feels bad for the first couple of days, but then she bounces back. So either we had to press on or we had to find places to come tuck in. Navigating the currents was equally difficult. This is a website called Null School that shows currents around the whole world. So you can see all these currents and eddies, not unlike going to Bermuda, where you've got all these currents and eddies. And the goal was to try and figure out where we wanted to be, put in some waypoints and try and hit it so that we would be able to ride the eddies and get where we wanted to go. And also miss these winds that were blowing through. So much of the coastline was exposed to ocean swells. So unless you're ready to go way up into a bay and tuck in, you had to stay outside and press on. So it definitely was not like cruising Long Island Sound. So when we did anchor, it was usually rolling, you know, because Candy had pre-cooked a lot of meals. We ate well, but you couldn't last long down in the galley when it was that rolling. So here's some of the coastline as we went by, you know, pretty inhospitable, very few protected harbors. The wind was all over the place, either nothing or way too much. So we tried to go offshore, but the waves only got larger. So we had to come around this point of land and then head way up onto the coastline because the wind was supposed to blow through. We found a little weather window. So we had to go way up on the shoreline in 30-foot water to go along the coast, because if you went out any further and these waves kicked up, you would instantly be in 8 or 10-foot waves. So we were playing it safe. And here's a little idea. If I can get the mouse to work. Well, so here we are motoring up into 20, 25 knots of breeze, trying to get up to the shoreline, which you can barely make out in the distance. So imagine that for like 12 hours. That was great. So while we're offshore one afternoon, Candy was in the head trying to do her business with a 15-degree heel. And she suddenly shrieked and burst out through the door screaming. A 7-inch flying fish had managed to fly out of the water, over the deck, and through the 10-inch square hatch right over the head and land in her lap. So I couldn't stop laughing, and she just, you know, didn't think it was funny at all, as you can well imagine. And then I had to pick up this big slimy thing and take it outside, and he was still alive, and he flew away. He had to go tell his friends. So we needed a wait or two for the Papagayo winds to subside. So we tucked into this in Costa Rica to Bahia de Culebra, and we anchored near the Marina Papagayo. Well, Marina Papagayo is like the Mediterranean there. All the mega yachts were in at the big marina, and we couldn't go in because it cost about $350 in fees to get in, and takes 2 days worth of bouncing between immigration and customs and all the places. And we were just stopping by. So we decided we had enough diesel, we probably could make it. Just this trip, we started with about 170, 180 gallons of diesel in the tanks, and we ended up with 20 by the time we got to Mexico. we had 5 5-gallon tanks on the deck that we hadn't put in the tanks. So that was our reserve, but we tried to sail as much as we could, but there was a lot of motoring. So we made the best of it. We were anchored in this harbor right off this beautiful high-end resort area. We barbecued some ribeye steaks. We had a wonderful time, and our friends who had been leapfrogging showed up the next morning as we were leaving. But we did have some nice neighbors, and the hotels in the distance had a 60-foot catamaran show up to take everyone out for evening cruises. So it was a really nice area. And then this was our next door neighbor. It was a 110-foot Fed ship, 361 feet, owned by the 10th wealthiest man in Russia. We watched as their helicopter came in and dropped off, crew or the owner, and his name was Dmitry Rubulyev, and he's worth $6.7 billion net worth. So we were astonished the next morning when we went by the boat on our way out. They had set up a full-size tennis court on the foredeck. So you can see and they didn't invite us. We were upset. Well, we didn't have our tennis rackets with us. But you can see the helicopter up on the back deck. So we tucked into another harbor in Costa Rica just because we were exhausted and beat up. So we went in here and we anchored off of this little town. So we got a few hours of much needed sleep. We kind of ate a little, we slept a little, everything was good. We knew we had a long passage ahead of us because we were going to press on past Nicaragua, El Salvador, and Guatemala. So at that point, we had started to have some problems with systems. So after 2 years of disuse, the shower and the sink gray water tank, the pump stopped working. So I had to try and do that. So we're bailing that out manually, and I'm passing up the buckets to Candy, and she's trying really hard not to throw up holding these buckets as she went overboard. The water maker, which is a pretty complicated system, underneath the pilot berth, taking up a very narrow area but very long, had gotten some bubbles and leaks inside. So I had to go through it, and it took hours to go through every single hose clamp and fitting on the boat and tighten everything so that we wouldn't have it. And ultimately, I was able to get it working again. So here we are sailing up the coast of Guatemala at 6.8 knots and 13 knots of breeze. You could see on the chart where small towns were, and we would tuck in close to the shore to get cell phone signals so we could get weather and other stuff. So as we approached Mexico, it was decision. Mexico has draconian laws regarding firearms. It's very difficult or impossible for the average citizen to own a gun, and all but impossible for anyone to import one unless you're going to a licensed hunting lodge and they run interference for you. And we had a shotgun on board. So the decision was ultimately made. I needed to shoot some rounds, and I fired shells with buckshot and slugs and rubber pellets, and I wrapped the gun up in its plastic bag, or its protective bag, and I'm ready to throw it overboard. And Candy looked at me and said, "Isn't that going to float?" I'm like, "No, it's really heavy. There's no problem at all. It's going to be fine." But guess what? The case floated. So then we sprung into an MOB drill. So now we had to figure out what we were going to do. So we go to the B&G, and I push the MOB button, and it doesn't work the way I thought it was going to work. All of a sudden, it's not showing, that we got it. So this exercise turned into a really good learning experience, because if one of us goes over, we want to know how this button works. But meanwhile, we have to turn around, we go back, we find the thing, we motor up to it slowly, everything's fine. Candy's on the side of the boat with a boat hook. She didn't want the damn gun on the boat to begin with, and now she has to fish it back out of the water. So we fish it back out of the water, and she hands it to me and says, "Okay, will you get rid of this?" So I had to zip it and throw the thing back overboard, and with a moment of silence. And then we rolled up the case and threw the case out with it, and we had our reburial at sea. So, you just can't plan for this stuff. So you have to be careful avoiding fishing nets and long lines set by the local fishermen. There are pangas everywhere, and they go out sometimes as far as 50 or 100 miles with 55-gallon jugs in the center of the panga. So sometimes they have little flags on the end of their nets. Sometimes they've got blinky lights, and if you turn the radar to the very, very closest range, you can see them just before you hit them. So here we are, unfouling a fishing line from our rudder, where we ran over a long line, and there was this blue ethylene or polypropylene line that came through, and it came off our keel and came back and caught on the rudder. So I'm in the back with the boat hook trying to push the thing down, and they're pulling up, and they didn't say a word. They weren't happy at all, and and then they took off. So here's a typical fishing boat that goes out a little further with long line nets, and they're usually, again, not marked or marked with very small flags. No one has AIS, and this is the good ship Don Ricardo. So here's a little navigation moment of what we're doing and how we do it. We navigate with the B&G system, in the right-hand display, which shows navionics and CMAP, but we rely heavily on PC running OpenCPN at the 19-inch PC on the side of the nav station, which also displays movies, Iridium Go satellite, email, and weather faxes. So that goes. And then on OpenCPN, we have now downloaded satellite image saved as MB tiles on OpenCPN. So the charts are backed up on another PC, and I've got a 5 terabyte hard drive as backup. But with this, there are plenty of YouTube videos that show you how to make your own MB tiles using a program that's called SAS Planet. MB tiles produced by others are available on all sorts of websites, and you can find areas. We actually had all the satellite pictures from Panama to Baja California. We could look at any strip of the coast and see what was there and compare it with the charts. So we actually watched another cruiser come into this harbor on AIS, and he showed up on the screen on AIS heading on the picture, and we watched him go up and in and all the way to the marina, and we saw what slip he went into in the marina, okay, from afar. And then we followed him back in, and we said, okay, yep, he's right where we thought he was going to be. That's where this kind of state-of-the-art navigation is now. So it's a combination of a bunch of things. Got to pre-download everything, back it up completely, and then once you've got it running, it's a game changer, complete game changer. So now I'm working on downloading all the charts for the whole South Pacific and having them in multiple locations. So we worked our way into Marina, Chiapas in Mexico, about 10 miles from the Guatemala border. We checked in with VHF, and we were greeted immediately by the Marina staff, and the Naval Authority had been checking in the other boats, so they were on site. So they made a cursory inspection of the boat. It was late in the afternoon, and they took some pictures, and it was nothing like the story of the drug-sniffing dogs and the checking every locker and tearing everything apart and looking for guns. But it was late in the day. We offered them some soda and some beer, and it was absolutely painless. So that's where we were. And the local town is Capachula. So I spent the next day clearing in with the crews from 2 other boats that just had arrived. And the marina manager drove us to the immigration office, to customs office, then the port captain, and we paid the fees and did all the paperwork. Candy cleaned the boat, did all the stainless steel, gathered laundry, and she found the marina's restaurant for lunch. So we did a lot of regular maintenance, washed the sails down, were covered with salt, changed the oil, pickled the water maker. We were introduced to a local tour guide, and we started making travel plans. So it was time. We were on our way. So here's our tour guide and Arturo and his family, and Candy had brought a bunch of little boat books and coloring books and, again, bubbles for these kids, and they were very happy to come visit us on the boat. We had to go to Guatemala to book in and get our TIP, temporary import pass for paper, which allows the boat to be in Mexico for 10 years. So you see why everybody's leaving Ecuador and heading to Mexico or Panama. On the way, we passed hundreds and hundreds of Haitian refugees who had crossed the border into Mexico and were waiting refugee status processing. It was almost scary. All they had was what they could wear or what they could carry. There were hundreds and hundreds of them along the side of the road. It was a very sobering and stark difference to us arriving in Mexico. So with our tip in hand, we set off to visit the pre-Mayan World Heritage Sites. So this was called Azapa, and it was inhabited from 1250 BC to 1200 AZ. It was once 315 acres and included pyramid-shaped terraces made out of stone without mortar. The flat stone was thought to have been used for sacrifices. There was beautiful stonework and water management canals and troughs. And the local people were the very first to grow coffee and chocolate. So we took a trip to and met a Mexican artisanal chocolate maker. So we did a one-day trip and we met Josephine. We made us hot chocolate. We had breakfast and quesadillas and tamales, beautiful hot chocolate that she had done. Her son had opened a medical clinic on her property, and we made a donation to the medical clinic. It was a really impressive setup, and we felt a really good connection with her. And we were very lucky to have such a good guide. So she was a multi-generational chocolate maker who catapulted herself into the international arena by making her chocolate and winning awards for it. Her uncle owned the cocoa plants, and she made the chocolate using equipment that her grandmother had inherited using old-fashioned techniques. So she had us roast the coconuts on an open fire and grind the chocolate on a stone roller and base that was over 100 years old. So it was really interesting to see what they had done. So then we took an overnight bus ride from Tapachula on the coastline to San Cristobal in the Chiapas mountain region. And we were supposed to visit some waterfalls and the Mayan ruins at Palenque. So we took a 4-hour walking tour of the city once we got in, and we loved San Cristobal. We got the lay of the land. The markets were very rich with indigenous wares and food. Some neighbors had a beautiful neighborhoods had beautiful wall frescoes, many of which were political in nature, but the Spanish influenced architecture and with cement and clay adobe, and it was very colorful and beautiful place to visit. They had indoor marketplaces, people commuted to towns in these colectivos, these little trucks that they would pay 20 pesos in and get a ride into town. Street side vendors were everywhere. So downtown.
So the indigenous people in Mexico.
Come over here a little bit.
Huh?
You got to talk in here.
The particular area that we were in, the indigenous people specialize in textiles. This particular outfit I purchased from one of the indigenous people, which they made. And so in different areas in Mexico, they specialize in different things. And this area happens to specialize in textiles. And they beautiful.
Candy was showing her top that she got from the indigenous people. So the deliveries come in from farms still using wagons and donkeys, and they're still living hundreds of years behind, even though all the restaurants and things have Wi-Fi and cell phone towers. So we arranged a day excursion to visit the beautiful waterfalls and the ancient Palenque ruins. So this meant cramming about 16 people into this really small van at 5:30 in the morning for a 5-hour one-way drive and back and returning at 10 p.m. So, of course, when the van stopped at our inn and we came out, all the seats were filled and the only empty seats were in the very back of the bus. So the Chiapas region of Mexico is self-ruling, and in lieu of stop signs and lights, they have placed speed bumps everywhere. Many of those speed bumps seem to be placed strategically in front of tiendas or restaurants or wherever they want you to stop. So as you might imagine, 175 speed bumps later in the rear of this tiny little van got to be a little old. So for the first time in my life, I played the age card. I told the driver that my back just was not going to handle being in the back of this van for 5 hours there, 5 hours back. So luckily, a young couple in the back thought it would be really fun to go into the back of the bus and very private. And we got the front seat. I got the front seat. Andy got the jump seat between the driver and I that was lashed to the engine with a rudimentary seatbelt across the top. And that was okay, but we soon realized what cowboys the van drivers were. He was screeching tires around the dead man's curve in the mountains, chasing dogs and young children off the road. It was heavy-handed use of the horn and a lead foot on the throttle. At one particularly sharp and screeching curve, Candy screamed and yelled at the driver, and the driver was a Mexican version of Ted Bundy. Okay, so she was immediately supported by applause from everyone else in the bus, and the bus driver actually did slow down a little bit. So we made it to the beautiful waterfalls, and we saw many of the beautiful and colorful residents there. And then we finally made it to Palenque, the reason that we came to St. Cristobal, an ancient Mayan ruins that date back to 226 BC to 799 BC or AD. They were designated a World Heritage Site in 1987. It's set in a lush jungle, and there's some of the most beautiful and unique pyramids in Mesoamerica, surrounded by streams and waterfalls, and only a small percentage of them have actually been uncovered. The setting and the stillness of the site made you feel like you were stepping back in time. Compared with some of the other Mexican sites, the uniqueness of it and the quality of the stone carvings make it very special. Its population at one point was almost 1 million inhabitants, which in turn led to its decline because the natural resources weren't there to keep it sustained. The pyramid is the only one in Mexico that was a tomb where people were able to gaze upon the remains of the ancient ruler Tikal, the god king of the Mayan people. It's estimated that less than 10% of the total area of the city is explored, leaving almost 1,000 structures still covered by the jungle. It's a medium-sized site, smaller than Tikal, which is another very well-known one, but it contains this beautiful architecture, sculpture, and relief carvings. And much of the history has been reconstructed because they had left hieroglyphics behind that they were able to decipher and got the history. And many of the beautiful stone carvings and things that had been discovered at Palenque have actually been removed to Mexico City. So we didn't get to see them, but this is what they had actually found. And just outside of the area was the Red Queen's bathing pool. So Tikal's mother was kind of revered, and she was called the Red Queen because when they buried her, they covered her with ochra, and she was red. So they called her the Red Queen. But this is where she and her cohorts would come down and bathe in the waters. So you can imagine that. So we planned a one-day trip to this canyon that was the Grand Canyon of Mexico. But the night before, Candy was stricken with Montezuma's revenge, so I went alone. So I was picked up by a minibus at our inn and delivered to a big tour bus for the ride. So we went on the ride and ended up with both a ride around the rim of the canyon and a boat ride through the middle of it. And the walls here are 100 meters, 3,200 feet tall. So it was really quite imposing and really amazing. And then we ran into some of the local natives. We saw monkeys on the cliffs and a couple of big guys who were basking on the rocks. So the tour was supposed to end at 4:30 and head back, but the operator extended it to 6 p.m. with 2 hours to get back. And it was looking like I would miss our overnight bus to get us back to the boat. And we had a very tight schedule the next day to fly out. So to top it off, my phone was down to 8%, and the bus dropped me off in the center of the city, not back at my inn. So I had to make my way back to the inn where Candy tried to hold a taxi for us. So I left Candy the paper map that showed the area. And so I had to stop at a tour guide store and grab another map. And with what's left of my juice, I texted Candy and said, okay, what's the address of the hotel? So I figured it out and I started running through the city, and there were thousands of people out in the plaza selling Christmas goods and things like that, because we were like 2 days before Christmas. And she had all my bags outside. We flagged down another cab. We raced to the bus terminal and got on with just minutes to spare to take us back to the coastline. And then it was back to our reality. We'd prepared the boat for 6 months of storage. We flew to Florida to meet my daughter for Christmas and her husband.
Jump in on it.
Oh, okay. Come up here.
The United States required 24-hour, you had to have COVID test. You had to have a PCR COVID test. So they didn't have that in Canal. So we had to hire a doctor to come to the boat, and we had to pay him $300 to take the test. So we had our flights planned, and we got to Mexico City, and as you all heard, flights were canceled. So we got to Cancun, but we were either going to spend Christmas in Cancun on the floor in the airport. We had to find a way home. We were fortunate enough to get a flight out on United because we had the 24-hour rule. We had to get there in 24 hours, or our COVID tests weren't going to be valid. we were fortunate enough to find a flight, and we were able to get back. That was good.
It was a very scary period because we thought we were going to be spending the night in like Mexico City or Cancun airport on the floor. So we finally got back to Panama and flew in, and with my daughter and her husband, who were our crew as we went out, and they're now starting their own family. So what's next? That's going to be a tough question. With new variants of COVID popping up and disappearing, and much of the world, including the South Pacific, has been closed or reclosing. So despite our opportunities to get inoculations, most of the world doesn't have those same, they're lagging behind by months or more. So we were forced to put off the South Pacific for 2 years, but we tend to make the best of it. Never in our wildest nightmares could we have imagined a closed, unwelcoming world after spending so many years preparing for this. So we are very carefully watching the situation in South Pacific and French Polynesia as their percentage levels of inoculations get higher, and they slowly reopen for much needed tourist dollars flow into their economies. So we hope that by next May, we will be able to set off on a 30-day sail to French Polynesia, land in the Marquises and Tuamotus, head through the Cook Islands, Niue and Tonga, and land in Fiji. So stay tuned for our next adventures. We'll tell you how it goes. And if you want to meet us in the South Pacific, give us a call. And you can watch us on www.cruisingindependence.com. Thank you. So we can take some questions really quick. And, I know it's kind of getting late, but if you have questions, now's the time. Throw it at us. Anything? Nothing? Candy is indeed very brave. No, the whales were about 20 feet away from us or so, not much closer. Dolphins all over near us. We were snorkeling once and had a barracuda that was a little more curious than we would have liked. But there were times we were snorkeling in Las Perlas, and you're going through along these beautiful coral areas, and there were literally 10,000 fish swimming around you, and the schools opening up and closing around you. We've seen some pretty amazing things. Yes. Yes. Oh, yeah. That wasn't Turks and Caicos. That was actually in where was that? Panama, looking down at the boat. Yeah, we went ashore in the what? Yeah. Oh, he had a drone. Yeah, Rick had his drone. In the picture of the beautiful waters with the boat, yeah, we weren't on a mountaintop. He had his drone with us. So, which was great. And I have a drone, and I have not been able to fly it. And when we went to the San Blas Islands, Rick and Chrissy were so disappointed because there were no bars, no other young people. They disallowed drones and no kiteboarding. So, half of their fun was shot, and they're stuck with these two old farts, So. Hi, Rick and Chrissy. All right.
Pirates? You guys are going to replace them?
No, we're probably not, but we've been very careful, and we actually have a stainless steel grates that can go down the companionway. We can lock the companionway, and the inside we've got bear spray and other things. So
We follow newsite.com, and that gives you all the up current information on probably steps pirates. We follow that, and you just sort of know from other cruisers what areas it is. Like we were way out around Columbia.
Yeah.
Stay away from Columbia. And
You'll notice though that was not a shot.
oh no, of course not. But it's very hard to find a picture of a gun in midair going into the water. And at the time, Candy was so happy to get rid of the damn thing. She wasn't out to pull out the camera and take pictures of it. Oh no, I had a Mossberg nickel-plated 10-shot Mariner. I mean, it was a really sweet gun. Oh yeah, no, it was. I was frustrated, but yeah. So, any other questions? And the goal is to be cautious, be prepared. go stay away from the shorelines, know where you should go and where you shouldn't go. There were towns that we went into that we felt we were pickpocketed in Ecuador. They got $60 or $80 a credit card and my passport ID card. So, they sprayed this goop in the air and it came down on Candy's hair and her shoulder. And she said, "Oh my God." And they said, "Oh, the birds. So I'm wiping Candy down and the guy's going through my pockets. So we've been hit. We don't leave anything on the deck. We've hauled the dinghy up every single night. We have big stainless steel chains that we lock the dinghy with. The engine's locked on with this massive stainless steel lock you wouldn't want to mess with. So we're very, forewarned, forearmed, prepared. So we're there.
There were a couple of those sketchy towns we went.
Yeah.
We even were out by
Yeah.
He flushed for my purse.
We went to go get diesel and Candy left her purse in the van. And she came out to take pictures of them pumping, practically by hand diesel into our dairy jugs. And the cab driver went through her purse and sold $200. So, yeah. But the goal is, and the other key is, you never carry the charge card that has all your auto pays with you. So mine was stolen and I spent 4 or 5 hours calling all the places trying to change my auto pays to something else. So now my auto pay charge card stays home. It doesn't even come on the boat. And that way I know that everything is still up and running. So it's just stupid things like that, and finding a bank where there's no overseas charges. I got a phone with Google Fi. So I'm allowed to get out of the country for 3, 4, 5 months before they start to clamp down and shut me off. So it works pretty well, So, but we also were buying SIM cards locally so that we could use the local phone system for data and for emails and things. And we use WhatsApp almost exclusively for calling. So it's free. It's what are they called? Yeah, private. No one else can see it. Encrypted, yeah, and it works extremely well. And the rest of the world is using that as their primary phone system. So we were right there with it. It got to the point where we got to know all the local cab drivers, and we were saying, this is San Carlos taxi, Jose, and we'd call because there were times we'd call for a taxi and we'd use the lady, and then the next day said, "Can you come pick us up at 9 o'clock to go to the Marina?" Yeah, no problem. And she wouldn't ever show. They have no compunction to show up on time. So we got to the point where we had a couple of guys that we really leaned on. We tipped them pretty well, and they just kept coming back because they knew we were serious. So that worked well. And you start to develop the friendships with them, So, and that's half the fun of it. That's why we're doing this, to see what's happening in the rest of the world. Okay, more questions? Anything else? Don't ask how much it all costs. We haven't figured that one out. And the goal here ultimately is it's less than it costs to live at home. It's about $300 a month to store the boat in some of these places, $500 to hold the boat out. And if you do the work yourself, it's really inexpensive. If you have to hire people, it's iffy on what kind of quality you're going to get. And I was a stickler for the right bottom paint and the right equipment. And I bring a huge suitcase every time I go down. This suitcase now is very well traveled, loaded full of boat stuff. So I'm bringing extra lines and hoses and switches, pumps and things. And it just travels back and forth with me. And I most recently used it to put all my ski stuff in so I could go to Colorado skiing. So we're there. All right.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Anyone on Zoom have questions? No questions? Hello, Toli.
Yeah,
Hi, Chrissy and Rick. No picture. And Nick, how are you? There are a lot of people I know. That's great. Thank you.
yeah.
Okay, so we're going to call that a wrap, and we will hopefully see everybody before we head back in June. Okay?
Thank you so much.
Adios.
Thank you.
Bye.
Sure, thank you.